Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. We're talking today about NFTs, and you might be thinking like, why? Why are we talking about NFTs? NFTs are dead. Nobody talks about NFTs anymore. They had their heyday in 2021. They were worth a lot of money, and now they're dead. Well, maybe if you're dead, the potential for exploiting you is even higher because nobody really notices you. Nobody really looks at what you're doing. So we are going to talk today about NFTs, and when we were looking into them, we actually found that their potential for financial crime is unbroken despite the lowering in value. And every NFT presentation has to start with this picture. That's every day, the first 5,000 days, from an artist called Beeple, and that's sold at the auction house Christie's in 2021 for $69 million US. Yeah, so that's how much money was there in art NFTs. And as I already said, that money is not in them anymore, but there's still money in them. Yeah, and because we're talking about the art market in particular today, that's a very volatile market. Yeah, everything is worth as much as you want it to be worth, or as much as it's hyped. And I already said big auction houses are involved, galleries are involved, so that might be while we're still talking about them. What we're doing today is we're going to first look at what are NFTs. And the reason why I'm not going to go into the tech, I'm just going to look at what different types of NFTs have we got, because the potential for exploitation is not there for all types of NFTs. NFTs can be used for a lot of different things, and not all of these can be exploited. Then we're going to look at, well, the ones that can be exploited, how are they exploited? And we look in particular at fraud, theft, but also interesting things like rug pulls and whatever we found in the literature, but also in the case law that we went through. And these are cases that we actually found. And then, last but not least, we're going to apply the crime triangle, because this is a conference about prevention, and we're going to look at how can we actually prevent such crimes or such exploitations of NFTs from happening in terms of financial crime. All right, so what can we use NFTs for? We might use them as in-game currency, or they might be games themselves, like CryptoKitties. Nobody remembers these things anymore, but they were like Tamagotchis. You could raise your own NFTs. So yes, they did have an inherent value, but the value wasn't massive, yeah? But there was some value in them, and there's still some value in them, but we'd say, like, in terms of exploitation, they're not they're not that valuable, actually. Just in-game assets, like you could buy an NFT sword, but that's actually not that popular anymore, so it's not used so much anymore, so the risk is not that high. Then we have tickets, yeah, for events you could get, and that was quite hyped, but it's expensive, and so it's not done that much anymore. You could get tickets. Exploitation, yes, there's an inherent value obviously in a ticket, but they were done for a different reason. They were done so that they couldn't be exploited. Yeah, they were done to reduce ticket touting, for example. So exploitation, we didn't see much risk in that, and there were no cases in relation to those. Then it gets more interesting with merchandise. Merchandise can also be collectible. Yeah, Chelsea Football Club. These are things that can rise in value, and they did rise in value for a certain amount of time, but that might not be that valuable anymore, so the risk is relatively low. Other collectibles, and you see the Bored Ape Yacht Club monkey to the left, they still have some value. And every time I give this presentation, or every time I talk about NFTs, I look up the value. It's actually, you know, you can still buy one for $90,000 US, so it's not no money. And so when it comes to merchandise, in particular when it comes to collectibles and art, obviously there is a risk, and that's what we're talking mainly about today. Utility, very low risk. Yeah, you can use NFTs in the supply chain to secure a supply chain. There's no risk in that particular area. And then art is mainly what we're looking at. And here, the interesting thing about the art part is that they were actually created to make or to reduce risk for artists and to reduce risk for buyers, because artists could now not use a middleman, which was a particular danger as well in using a middleman. They could sell their art themselves. The buyer would have the provenance. They would know this is from the particular artist. Smart contracts ensured that, and so generally they were seen as something really safe. So are NFTs art? We're not going to go into that, but we can see them as an artistic movement. As I said before, they were there to make transactions safer, to cut out the gatekeepers so that artists would actually make more money with their art. And to prove provenance. However, NFTs are value-driven, or the value of NFTs is driven by their uniqueness and their scarcity. And as you can see with the Beeple example, the moment people saw there was money in there, galleries, auction houses went in there. What we can see since last year, galleries, auction houses are going out. Yeah, so Christie's is still selling NFTs, but they have closed down their digital art department and have moved the NFTs to the fine arts department. So it's not a big market for them anymore. Sotheby's Metaverse and NFT team have been reduced to 3 people now, so it's not a big market for them anymore. And digital art platforms that were quite prominent, like Known Origin, have closed down, not selling art NFTs anymore. And the trading volume fell significantly from 2.97 billion in 2021, which was the biggest year for them, to 197 million. Yeah? So are they still a risk? What has been suggested in 2022, when the hype was there, that there was actually the market will grow to 231 billion by 2030, we don't see that, yeah? So that's not going to happen. So the risk of really high crimes is not there. But research from 2024, which was done when already the prices were going down, sees an average of 300,000 per fraud event. So even when we say there's only 30,000 now, that's still significant money. And our research at some stage, we saw that NFTs can be stolen, have been stolen, and that actually quite a lot of money went missing. And even when the 100 million within a 1 year period will not be achieved anymore, they can be stolen, and they are still being stolen. So we think we should care, and we think there is still a lot of crime, and that's just fraud and theft. And there are a lot of other terrible things that you can do with NFTs that Colin's now going to talk about.
So Saskia mentioned this idea of are NFTs art. That's how we got started in this whole area. 2021, NFTs were everywhere, all over the news, and we had this chat, are they really art? We quickly moved on from that. We were more interested in how NFTs can be used in financial crime. And I want to give some examples here. First example is to talk about NFT-related fraud. And one way of doing this might be creating a replica or a fake NFT online store. So with similar domain names, similar web pages, links, and so on, they're designed to attract customers in, to convince them that you are on the real NFT marketplace. On the right here, I think this is the OpenSea website. I'm not actually sure. I went looking for it, took a screenshot, but that is the, or purports to be the OpenSea NFT marketplace. The reason I put that on the slide is the indictment on the left. Soufiane Oulayen, he allegedly replicated the OpenSea marketplace. He also paid for search engines to have his website first when people search for OpenSea. So anyone who went there saw, oh, OpenSea, the first page, went there, and he convinced them to put in their seed phrases, essentially their passwords, and he then used that to go to their passwords and take the items they had in their own crypto wallets. Ironically, he then sold the things he stole from those wallets on the legitimate OpenSea marketplace. Another example of financial crime here would be a rug pull. Essentially, you'd have the creators of an NFT project would build up the community only for it to later be abandoned. And essentially, this involves intentional deception by the creators with the object of self-enrichment. And a notable example here is the Frosties NFT collection. This had a metaverse game promised, it had staking mechanisms, but when the NFT project achieved $1.1 million in sales, the creator said, enough's enough, we've got what we wanted. They closed down the Discord community, the web page, and off they went with the money. They were caught, they actually thought they were anonymous. You're never anonymous when you have the online web sleuth community. They were identified 2 months later, and then law enforcement took over and prosecuted them. They prosecuted them they arrested them while they're in the middle of creating a repeat of the same scam with a different NFT scheme. Insider dealing. NFTs are particularly ripe for insider dealing, and probably the most high-profile allegations in relation to NFT financial crime concerns this offence. Nathaniel Chastain, he was a former OpenSea employee. He was accused of having confidential information, using that, buying NFTs the day before they were to be profiled on the OpenSea main page, and selling them a day later. Essentially, once something was profiled on the main page, prices go up, and he took advantage of that. He was convicted and sentenced in 2023. And you see here from the US Attorney's Office, their press release, he's sentenced to prison in the first ever digital asset insider trading scheme. And I have an asterisk next to insider dealing at the top there. He wasn't actually charged with insider dealing. He tried to get the indictment dismissed on that basis, that he wasn't dealing with securities. The court rejected that argument. They said he's not actually charged with insider dealing, he's charged with wire fraud. And wire fraud does not require there to be a security involved. He was also charged with money laundering. There was a further twist to this case. So, convicted, sentenced to prison 2023. In 2025, his conviction was quashed because there was a misdirection by the trial judge. And in January this year, prosecutors announced that they would not be seeking a retrial, partly because he'd already served 3 months in prison and he did not contest the forfeiture of the cryptocurrency that he obtained with his scheme. These examples so far, these are examples of situations where NFTs are used as a tool for criminal activity. So it enables the crime. In other instances, the NFT might be the target of crime, so theft is an obvious example, or in some instances, it can be bought. So to give an example here, there was a scheme on the Polygon network. We had NFT airdrops, and as soon as someone opened the NFT that was dropped into their wallet, embedded links were activated that brought that person to, unknowingly brought them to malicious websites that were linked to the Inferno Drainer, and then items that were in their wallets were stolen. Final point to mention with theft is the role of state-sponsored activities. So there was a theft from Axie Infinity. $540 million worth of items were stolen that were linked to the North Korean Lazarus group. And the final crime to mention here is money laundering. Of course, money laundering can overlap with the other crimes mentioned. So the Nathaniel Chastain case I mentioned, insider dealing, he was also charged with money laundering. And traditional money laundering typologies can be applied to the NFT context. So you have trade-based money laundering, which we'll hear more about in the next presentation. You can have self-laundering, you can have laundering through a professional, and so on. There is, of course, potential for NFTs to be used in money laundering, but there have been mixed views on the extent to which this is happening. So Reese is adamant this practice is happening. Money laundering is taking place in the NFT sphere. In contrast, Zoo says that the scale of money laundering in NFT appears to be quite small so far. And Manning and colleagues say NFTs don't really offer any additional advantage over already existing money laundering schemes. And we've looked at this, we're both coming at this initially from the criminal law perspective. Are criminal laws adequate for dealing with NFT-related crime? Our view in our earlier research is generally yes. We don't need new laws in this area. What we're looking at now is the idea of prevention is better than cure. And so we're looking at what can be done to prevent NFT-related crime. What practical steps, for example, can be taken to prevent common crimes in the NFT context? What solutions might be implemented to stop this at source? And we look at John X crime triangle. I think many people here might know it in the context of problem-oriented policing. You have the inner triangle and you have the outer triangle. For a crime to take place, generally you need all elements of the inner triangle. You need an offender, you need a place, and you need a target. So, give one example, real-world context. Let's say you have a thief. You have a burglar, just a thief going into a local shop. So the thief there is the offender, the place is the local shop, and the victim is the owner of the shop. But what preventive measures could be put in place? Well, what if the shop had CCTV in place, or if there was a security guard on the door? These can help to prevent crime. In the NFT context, we're not concerned with physical space. We're looking at a virtual marketplace, for example. And this does open up greater scope for more criminality. We're not restricted to a local place. And we can see some scenarios. Just looking at one, the insider dealing case, we did have the offender, the employee, working at the place, the NFT marketplace. The victims there will be the people who were effectively conned into paying more for the NFT. What prevention schemes could be put in place? Well, there were some weak efforts initially. OpenSea did require employees to promise not to use any confidential information beyond their business purpose. Obviously, that didn't work. And after the allegations came to light, they did bring in clearer policies and processes to require that employees now sign written agreements to stop this happening. So it shows I suppose the importance of controllers, the employer in that context, in providing an additional layer of crime prevention. The crime triangle doesn't always work though. If we use theft again, if you have a person, the offender, convincing the victim to disclose the seed phrase, no matter how secure online wallet providers have their systems, no matter how secure that is, if someone has the password to just get into the wallet, it's not going to stop the crime taking place. So you do also need to educate people themselves not to give their password out freely. And essentially thinking about things like this, looking at crimes that have taken place to identify vulnerabilities with NFT-related crime can help us to move beyond criminal law, move beyond is criminal law adequate, to look at how such crime can be prevented. As I said, we've already made the point, we don't really need new laws in this area. Even so, there have been calls for greater regulation. There have been calls for NFTs to be brought within anti-money laundering regulation. I think that's probably overkill, especially we've already heard about the value dropping. We have NFTs being used for tickets. Do we want to have AML requirements applied in that context? And also look at it from the policing perspective. Police officers here, how many of you would have NFTs as a priority in your daily life? Presuming not. So I think there is role for NFT marketplaces, for example, to play a greater role here in crime prevention, to identify where are crimes happening. Give one example, Magic Eden. They brought in Know Your Customer rules 2 years ago. In response to rug pulls, they identified that there was a problem, that there were rug pulls happening on their website. They identified a solution, KYC processes, and that did decrease the number of rug pulls on their websites. So we're looking at this, we're going through different cases using NFTs or where NFTs were involved in criminal activity. And it's showing us that NFTs can be and are being used in different criminal offending, and that can require different prevention techniques. Ultimately, our argument is that the crime triangle is useful for looking at this and trying to stop this happening at source. Thank you.